You're watching Sky News with me, Martin Stanford. It's the time of the evening when we like to reflect on the day's stories with our studio guests, and we're going to be considering the Litvinenko case with our two first guests in just a moment. But also we want to hear from you, of course, on the various stories around today. So do get in touch and use your phone number, because we would like to call you back and get you involved asking the questions on the air. news@sky.com is the place to write to, or 84501 is the number for text. Would you want to go and live on the moon, I wonder? And how about this for an admission? America is not winning the war in Iraq. It's surprising to hear such an admission from the man who would be the US Defence Secretary, but let us know what you think in the usual way. Well, with me now and throughout the rest of this hour are two men whose perspective on today's news has its origin in very different personal backgrounds and enthusiasms. David Shayler is a counter-intelligence officer, former counter-intelligence officer with MI5. Welcome to you, David. And Jonathan Margolis is a science writer, and we'll be talking to you perhaps about the moon matters a little bit later on, Jonathan, but wanted to join in on the first item too, because we're going to start with the news from Russia that British detectives, which are currently there, pursuing inquiries into Alexander Litvinenko's death. But a senior Russian legal official, the Prosecutor General, said today there is no chance a Russian can be extradited to Britain. The background then from Alex Rossi.
They normally work unnoticed, but as Scotland Yard detectives arrived in Moscow, it was to a scrum of publicity. Such is the interest in the Alexander Litvinenko poisoning case. One of the men investigators want to talk to is Andrei Lugovoy, who met Litvinenko on the day he became ill. I interviewed Mr. Lugovoy just over a week ago. He told me he thought he would be dragged into the investigation eventually, but denied involvement.
I have no idea who could be behind his death. I, of course, have some of my own suspicions because we did talk sometimes. I'm ready to discuss them with the British and the Russian police.
Andrei Lugovoy's advisors say the former FSB agent, who was a business associate of Alexander Litvinenko, is now in hospital. It's been reported he's tested positive for polonium-210. But Russian prosecutors say he will be questioned by them in the presence of British police. There are at least two other witnesses who it's thought will also be interviewed. Vyacheslav Sokolenko and Dmitry Kovtun met with Alexander Litvinenko on the day it's thought he was poisoned. One witness off limits, though, is Mikhail Trepashkin, a former colleague of Litvinenko. He's currently serving a 4-year jail term for revealing state secrets. He claims he told Litvinenko he was on a rogue FSB hit list which was targeting enemies of the state. The Russian authorities, though, say a man convicted of treason is not a reliable witness.
Mikhail Trepashkin says that he possesses some information which could somehow shed new light on Litvinenko's death. That's why he's looking for a chance to make it public.
The Russian authorities have also insisted if the main suspect or suspect is a Russian citizen, they'll not be extradited to face trial in the United Kingdom on constitutional grounds.
We will be doing the interrogating, not Scotland Yard, because the investigation takes place in Russia. They will be able to take part in it.
Andrei Lugovoy and his two associates have publicly denied again and again any involvement. But British detectives believe these men may have crucial information which could help them make sense of Alexander Litvinenko's sinister death. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Moscow.
So let's discuss this topic with my guests, David Shayler and Jonathan Margolis. David Shayler, are British police officers wasting their time over there?
Well, no, I think they've got to go over there and try and liaise with the Russian police to collect the evidence. I mean, this is obviously a very fraught process. Certainly I worked on the Lockerbie issue and looked at how British police have to go to places like Malta and Switzerland and so on. And believe it or not, there's no actual duty of these police to actually help anybody in this case. It's all done through goodwill and through good diplomatic relations. But certainly
There's no duty on what? The Russian police?
The Russian part, no, to investigate something like this. They're doing this all as goodwill, basically.
Right.
And there are ways and means of doing it, of course,
right.
But those procedures have to be followed. And it's obviously would create a diplomatic incident if we had British police, knocking down doors or even interviewing suspects without the Russian authorities knowing about it.
What's they limited their powers? I mean, a British police officer almost goes there as a tourist, does he?
Absolutely. He has to ask it as a favour that they will call in these suspects and be there while the questions are put to them. In some cases, of course, they won't even allow the police to do the direct questioning. They'll have to put a set of written questions to the Russian police, who will then put that to the person who's being interrogated.
And they have no means of checking what answers came back, then?
Oh, well, these things are usually recorded in this day and age, so they'll be able to take away perhaps a copy of the recording.
Tape recordings.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, in this day and age, of course, these can be falsified very, very easily. But I think that what we've got to get over here is the fact that the Russians are cooperating with this, and that they are playing ball, basically, because everybody is saying in this country that this is the Russian government. And I don't believe that's the case. I believe it's much more likely to be the oligarchs who are connected to this kind of new world order of high finance, the oil industry and the arms industry, who assassinated Litvinenko, because Litvinenko was not a simple dissident. He was actually blowing the whistle on false flag terrorism. This is the same thing that I blew the whistle on. And of course, these people in the New World Order don't want this to come out, because there are many other examples of this, and I include among them 9/11 and possibly 7/7, and they're trying to keep a lid on it. And the reason they're carrying out these false flag operations and blaming Islamic extremists, for example, is so that they can invade countries like Iraq and Afghanistan. And of course, that's all very good for the arms industry, the oil industry, and the finance industry.
OK, hey, slow down. I think you're going to... I haven't just got to join the dots up here. Bear with us, Jonathan, in a minute. I will come to you in a second. You're saying the oligarchs would want him dead because he's about to tell us what?
Well, he's actually a whistleblower on false flag terrorism. The false flag terrorism he blows the whistle on is in September 1999, and we're calling this 999 now. There were a series of explosions at tower blocks in Moscow. And these were blamed on Islamic Chechens, basically.
Now, we have heard this story. This is the allegation is that the Russian government did this. Or the
well,
FSB
certainly the
right?
FSB, the Russian intelligence service,
as
were
a
involved.
means to justify the invasion of Chechnya.
Absolutely, yes. They were caught doing it. It's not clear whether these were rogue elements of that service or whether it's being done on behalf of the Russian government. I have to say that. But Litvinenko was using his own personal experience to bear on other issues and was starting to investigate perhaps other examples of false flag terrorism. He was about to write a book and so on. And they didn't want this stuff coming out from somebody who already had a reputation for blowing the whistle and somebody who looked to be very, very reliable.
But there's no comparison, is there, that even if Russian authorities or rogue Russian elements did that to justify an invasion of Chechnya, are you saying there's a parallel with what happened on 9/11 to justify an invasion of Iraq?
I am saying that, yes, and if you actually look at the document called...
for that?
Well, there's a document written by the neocons. This includes people like Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld and Pearl and even Jeb Bush, the brother of the president. And this dates from September 2000, before the current Republican administration. And they say in that, quite barefaced, that America needs fuel, needs energy. So they say we've got to secure a gas pipeline across Afghanistan. We've got to secure the oil supply from Iraq and Iran. But we can only do this through an invasion, and the people of America won't accept this in the absence of a catastrophic and cataclysmic event like a new Pearl Harbor. And of course, Pearl Harbor was what inflamed American public opinion to get the Americans into the Second World War.
So you're asking us to believe that an American administration, or elements within an American administration, deliberately set around to murder 3,000 of its own citizens to justify invading Iraq?
I am, because the profit's involved, and look what's happened as a result of it. Halliburton got a no-bid contract for billions of dollars. Dick Cheney, of course, is associated with Halliburton. When you look at the physical evidence for 9/11 to prove the official story, it's simply not there. I know from working on the Lockerbie issue, for example, that every time a plane goes down, it is a requirement of international law that there is an air crash investigation carried out. And that's quite separate from any investigation into terrorism. So on that day, we should have 4 air crash investigations. We have none. So we can hand on heart say there is no evidence that Flight 11 went into the North Tower and Flight 175 went into the South Tower, because they didn't do that painstaking forensic work. And similarly...
Well, what is the video we know and show? We're getting a bit off topic here, but I mean...
Well, I would say to anybody, slow that video down and make your own conclusion about what is going on there. But what I must also mention as well, which I find very suspicious as a former counter-terrorist officer, is that less than 1% of the steel taken from Ground Zero was forensicated. The rest of it was shipped off to China, where it was melted down. Now, that, again, is a criminal offence to interfere in a crime scene. And yet this less than 1% that was forensicated showed traces of sulphur, which is consistent with a byproduct of thermate, an explosive used in controlled demolition, clearly implying the towers were brought down by controlled demolition. And I'd say to anybody else, look at Building 7. Do you know about Building 7?
Tell me. Briefly.
That
we need to get on back to
day at 5:20, Building 7 came down. A 47-storey building comes down in 6.5 seconds. The central column goes first, it falls in its own footprint. That is entirely consistent with controlled demolition. And the leaseholder of the site, Larry Silverstein, says a year later on PBS, the decision was made to have it pulled. Pulled is an industry term for a controlled demolition. This is clear evidence that those buildings were not brought down by aeroplanes and burning jet fuel. They were actually brought down by detonations from within the building, and that is way beyond the capability of Al-Qaeda.
Well, let's see what our viewers say. If you want to join in this and disagree with David, or if you're offended by what he's alleging, please do join in. news@sky.com, 84501. Can I just bring us back to... Well, let me just clear up one thing. You seem to be... To complete the trio of allegations, you seem to say that 7/7... Was that done, are you alleging, by anything other than the suspects who we now know were involved in that, for any other reason? Well, for what particular reason? What other motivation was there?
I'm saying there that the evidence to show that these 3 men from Leeds and 1 from Aylesbury were responsible is simply not there. For example, the train they're supposed to have got, according to the official Home Office narrative, the 7:40 train from Luton that day was cancelled. So clearly the official story starts to fall down, basically. If you look at the picture taken at 7:21 outside Luton, allegedly of the 4, you really can't identify from that picture. And I've been to check this out myself at Luton, and I believe that picture is a fake, that they weren't there that day. In fact, there's more pictures of those guys taken on the 28th of June when they did the so-called practice run than there are of the actual day of the attack. And we've also got to ask the question as well...
It breaks down, David. What's the motivation? I mean, this sounds crazy, but who would do that to British citizens, to bring mayhem and terror to the tube system and indeed the bus that blew up in Tavistock Square? For what end?
People who want to control society. At that point, a lot of people in Parliament even were asking questions about the ID scheme, for example, the ID card scheme. That has now gone through Parliament, that's now become law. They've also, as a result of 7/7, passed even more draconian terror laws. At the moment, there's a massive prison building programme going on in this country, and yet quite a lot of surveys are showing that crime is going down. Now, why is that? And I believe very firmly, and I don't care if people think I'm mad doing this, I've done a lot of research into it, and I've also witnessed this sort of thing myself in the services, is that the people who are in charge, I'm talking about this conspiracy of high finance, the oil industry and the arms industry, realise they haven't taken the people with them on their foreign adventures. And they're getting to the point where they realise that people, once they realise what's going on, will revolt against them. So they're looking at any way they can of controlling society. And we're already seeing that.
Well, let me ask Jonathan, because he's been waiting patiently to say... He's actually suggesting, then, that these people are so powerful, whoever these figures are, that they can effectively get round democracy, control governments, control events. Is that credible?
To sort of look at it from another point of view. I'm fascinated by conspiracy theories, and we've been talking about little else for the last hour for the programme. Because there's a saying in Yorkshire I used to work that them that believe nout will believe out. In other words, if you take somebody who's routinely sceptical about everything, you can actually sell them anything. Now, if I went out tomorrow and started a theory that David Shayler is actually, he's one of them. He's not really departed from he's still part of MI6, SIS, and that he's been put amongst us to spread a crazy conspiracy theory about 9/11 and 7/7 in order to discredit the right-thinking people who are beginning to have their doubts. But so if you're, a farmer in Ohio and you're beginning to think, well, it could all have been a plot by the government, then I can say, well, look how nutty these guys are, and so you can discredit them. Now I'm not suggesting that you're actually you're running this campaign as a current intelligence officer. But I'm saying that if I put that out there, I would get believers within a week. I guarantee it. I'm actually researching a book on this very thing at the minute on how to, create your own cult. And it
so you've just written another chapter.
Yeah, you've got another chapter already. This is good value coming in. I mean, don't get me wrong. David's a very credible bloke, and I don't believe he is doing this as a kind of a psy-war operation. But you could put out a rumour that he is. And that's... but
the trouble... let's come back to this, because you've lived in the world where nobody quite knows what to believe, is it? Because it's not just a three-dimensional, it's a four-dimensional chess game going on here, and you have to try and think what's going on. Let's just pause for our headlines. So it's just coming up to the half hour, so let's just run it. If you're just tuning our way, good evening to you. This is Sky News, and here are the headlines. The father of 2 British children who died of carbon monoxide poisoning in Corfu has spoken for the first time about their deaths. Neil Shepherd called on tour operators to improve safety standards at resorts. Minister of Defence confirmed tonight that a Royal Marine has been killed and other wounded in a battle with Taliban fighters in Afghanistan. George Bush's choice to be the next Defence Secretary, Robert Gates, has admitted he... Talking tonight with David Shayler, who is my guest. Jonathan Margolis is also here. We're going to be talking about life on the moon, maybe, in just a few minutes, but there's so much to respond to, David Shayler, from the emails that have been coming in. I salute you for telling the facts behind 9/11 publicly. I'll always have a doubt, says one emailer. Other one, Anne says that you're not our usual standard of expert, but I'm not sure what she means by that. All I want to say is I totally agree with what David is saying. Is another one. At last, someone talking sense make that man Prime Minister. I've been in demolition 15 years, and your guest, David, is spot on. There is something very wrong with 9/11. And a final one at this stage. The minute I saw the Twin Towers come down, I did not believe the planes alone could have caused it. Totally agree with David Shayler. And I think there's one here, just in here, suggesting you belong with David Icke as a rather eccentric gentleman, to try and paraphrasing here, but do you appreciate that? It's such a sensitive topic, even now. I mean, one has to think of the people who lost, British people whose lives were lost in the atrocities of that day, and American lives too. You have to be absolutely certain, don't you, to say that somebody other than terrorists wanted to do that to their fellow citizens?
Well, I wouldn't be doing this unless I'd done the research, and I've checked the source documents. I've, seen the Rebuilding America's Defences document, for example. I have looked at expert reports by a physicist called Dr. Stephen Jones, who is an expert in metallurgy, and he has written a paper called Why Indeed Did the Towers Collapse, and he comes to the conclusion that the most likely cause of the collapse of the Twin Towers in Building 7 is a controlled demolition.
But can you link... I mean, you've thrown accusations at the neocons. Can you link the neocons then actually put the plan to put what you claim as explosives in the towers?
Well, there are also witness reports that the Twin Towers, in the run-up to those attacks, that security was pulled out and there was some very strange maintenance work going down in which the CCTV was turned off. Certainly, Marvin Bush, a brother of the President, has actually been involved in security at the Twin Towers, for example. And there's a story we were discussing earlier on about a group of Israelis who were arrested cheering the attacks on the day. And there's since been an investigation which establishes that they are connected to Mossad. So it's not like we're talking about stuff that we're just seeing on internet sites here. And another good example is actually the 19 hijackers. Now, one of the things I got suspicious about straight away was how do they find out that these were 19 hijackers? It took 2 years to bring indictments in Lockerbie. That's something I worked on.
Yeah.
And yet here we are, 3 days later, saying we know absolutely who the 19 are. And yet, if you look at the flight manifests, you can get those on the internet, there are no Arab names on those flight manifests. And clearly after that, the FBI was obliged to admit that the information they had would not have stood up in a court of law. Now that's bad enough, because the 9/11 Commission accept this uncritically. But in fact, 9 of those hijackers have turned up alive. And this has been reported on the BBC, the Daily Telegraph, the Guardian, and prestigious newspapers in the US. This is not stuff we're getting off conspiracy theory websites. But the 9/11 Commission makes no attempt to reconcile why the FBI is saying that these men are the 19 hijackers and why 9 of them are still alive, basically. That's a very good example of where the 9/11 Commission doesn't do it well.
I should just, though, flag up one of the things you said there, which is there is so much sensitivity about sort of anti-Semitism related to many conspiracies around the world. And I've read about this one before, that there was somehow Mossad was involved or the Israelis were involved. I mean, does that seem credible to you, Jonathan?
It was reported. I found, we were again talking about this earlier, I found this a couple of years ago, and I thought, oh, here we go, another wacko theory. But actually, it's been reported by quite credible sources in the US, I mean, proper newspapers and magazines. And they're not suggesting that they were exactly, I think you're wrong in saying that they were cheering it. The report from, it involved a TV van a TV repair van that belonged to a company that didn't exist, that was proven to be some kind of fake company. And there was a picture, they were taking pictures of one another with their van, and the Twin Towers were coming down, and the suggestion from the neighbours in, I think it was New Jersey, who saw this happening, were not that they were pleased about it, but just that it was look, we said this was going to happen, it's happened. And it sounds like another wacko theory, but again, there is a surprisingly, from what I read, a surprisingly high level of credibility to it. And and we know the stories about that haven't been really disputed about the Bin Laden family being kind of whisked out of out of the US at the time. Now,
but these all can be. I mean, they're not conclusive, they can be explained by coincidence.
And this is the problem with conspiracy theories.
Can I just explain things that can't be explained away? For example, how does, even if you think that it's a 757 that goes into the Pentagon, how does that get through the Pentagon's automated anti-missile defence system? The only thing that can get through that is someone who knows the code for friendly fire that day. And then, in addition to that, of course, there is an 18-foot hole you can see in the facade of the Pentagon before it falls, and the picture's taken before it falls. But no damage consistent with wings or engines.
Well, there was an engine found on the front lawn, wasn't there?
No, not on the front lawn. No, there was actually a turbine found inside, but that's been identified as a turbine belonging to an A3 Sky Warrior, a US military plane, not to a 757. And
the idea that the superstructure of the plane was vaporised in the subsequent explosion, you don't think...
Well, that's what they say, but then they also say they identified 184 bodies from DNA. Now, if it's hot enough to vaporise titanium, it's hot enough to vaporise carbon, which is what our bodies are made of. And at the back of the ceiling of the Pentagon, there is another 16 to 18-foot hole. Now, that clearly means that the object has gone through 6 layers of reinforced concrete, each 1.5 feet
thick. I've read about this. This is a cruise missile attack, right? I've read the conspiracy theories.
So that is evidence consistent with the cruise missile attack.
Which begats any kind of belief, doesn't it, that the Americans would launch a cruise missile? From what vehicle?
Well, clearly they had to be fired by the American military again, because it wouldn't have got through the Pentagon's automated anti-missile defence system if it wasn't sending out a friendly fire signal.
There again, a friend of mine, and not a friend of mine, an actual friend of mine, watched the plane crashing into the Pentagon, because his office, his TV production company, is above it, and he watched the entire thing happen. I don't know whether he's been used.
If he hasn't actually come forward as a witness, because there are no witnesses of an actual plane going into the Pentagon. Lots of people talking about planes nearby, but then again, look at the expert witnesses. The people at the nearby airport, Washington Airport, the air traffic controllers are absolutely convinced that what they saw heading towards the Pentagon was either a very small military plane or a missile. And of course, they see civilian jet airliners day in, day out.
A couple of things I wanted to... Can I bring it back for Litvinenko? I mean, we could go on all night about this, couldn't we? Why... Because one of the puzzles is, why would you use these alpha emitter type things? Why polonium-210? Was it known, for instance, of the rather extraordinary and hideous illness that he would suffer as a result, and death was inevitable? What message, what clues do we read into the chosen method of killing?
Yeah. Well, I'd say if it was the Russian intelligence services, they would use the usual method. And we know that in the past, the KGB have used rolled up newspapers, you shoot something up somebody's nose, you're walking past them, and you don't even see the person doing it, they then almost instantly die of a heart attack. This is a drug that's very difficult to trace, and so anybody then accused, of course, of saying that person was bumped off by the Russians, you can turn around and say conspiracy theorist, he only died of a heart attack.
Right.
So what this has clearly been done for, I think one thing is to discourage other people from blowing the whistle on false flag terrorism, but also to string the whole thing out. If it had just been done very quickly, it would be in the press for a couple of days, then it would all disappear. But because it was a very slow and involved death, we have the picture of this man day in, day out, on our TV screens, in the newspapers, and this is designed again to inflame British public opinion and perhaps create a new Cold War between Britain and Russia, or possibly even a Third World War, I don't know.
The problem is that I think we all... I know there's a lot of respectable opinion that now believes that this wasn't the Soviet, I say Soviet, it gives my age away, a Russian government plot.
No, it wasn't a Russian government plot. It might have been rogue elements within the FSB, but David says not
problem
for
is,
that.
I think we all want to...
hold a Plutet?
I think we all want to think that it's not an official government thing. I don't really want to get into a row with a bunch of guys with rusty nukes, the electronics made by Lada. It's not really something we want to even consider. So I think it suits us all to think that it's mucky business amongst oligarchs in London.
Do you reflect on why conspiracy theories and theorists enjoy a lot of passion, if not a massive audience?
I think it's part of a continuum that starts with apocalyptic theories of all kinds. It's always been smart to believe in apocalyptic theories. Now, the problem, I mean, all the smart money is on man-made global warming, for example, being a real thing, and that it really is going to kill us all. If it does, this is great, but it will, well, it's not great, it's terrible, but it will mean this will be the first time mankind has ever got something right about his own future, something considerable right. So it may well be the case, and there is reason to believe we are capable, for the first time in our 10,000-year history as Homo sapiens, for the first time we are capable of predicting something of that magnitude. But it's kind of unlikely, because if you look at the people who were predicting global warming back in 1975, they were predicting global cooling. and it's all a bit worrisome. There is something in the intelligentsia, middle-class, educated mind which loves conspiracy, horror story, apocalypse, and all these...
Well, is it, David, because it's unexplainable, actually. We don't get satisfactory answers to a lot of these mysteries.
And we find that
frustrating. So
we find it I'm saying we find it satisfying. We enjoy mysteries and doom-laden predictions, and this is and the middle class have always done this. They've always loved it. They'd latch on some lunatic like Nostradamus.
But if we took it all at face value, with all due respect to David and his views here, we'd be petrified, wouldn't we?
Yeah. No, but I'm saying that we enjoy that.
This is the opportunity to change the world, because 9/11 is so easy to expose as the official story certainly being wrong, and I believe as an inside job, that's the only conclusion you can come to when you see a missile somehow hitting the Pentagon and getting through this automated anti-missile defence system. That this actually gives us hope. This is a way in which we can expose these people and expose this evil once and for all. Because 9/11 was an inside job, but this is not unusual. It's not the exception to the rule. You've only got to look at what Kermit Roosevelt says about what was going on in Iran with Mossadegh. He now says in his memoirs, and this has been backed up by Freedom of Information documents, that the Americans were carrying out terrorist attacks in the Middle East and blaming it on Mossadegh so they could topple the Mossadegh regime. That is now a matter of public record from the Freedom of Information Act. And I think the same sort of thing will happen about 9/11. But because of the internet now, of course, we can share this information much more quickly. And the reason that people are interested in so-called conspiracy theory is the fact that the facts are there. There is incontrovertible proof that buildings were brought down by...
Respect, and I know we haven't got time to go into every detail. We haven't made the connection, have we? You've proposed a radical and, some might say, irrational political logic for doing this.
But I haven't had a chance to explain it fully.
Well, I know, we haven't had time. But you've then said there are unexplainable facets we know about the investigation and the state of the buildings and so forth. But you haven't joined the two up.
Well, I think what you have in the sense that we've said that all we can ever say anything is given the situation we have in terms of being able to investigate stuff, is what is more likely. And it's far more likely that elements of the American state were able to get in the Twin Towers and plant all these explosives and bring them down than it was Al-Qaeda could. The same thing about...
Did the American state book the planes? Fly the planes?
Well, this is the interesting thing about the planes. FAA records, Federal Aviation Authority records, show that Flight 11 and Flight 77 didn't even take off that day. And where's all the CCTV footage of these hijackers in the airports? There's no CCTV footage being released of them in the airports where the planes took off.
So I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but the shot, the iconic shot, which is emblazoned in all our minds, those of us that were around that day and were reporting that day, of planes hitting the tower, how do you explain that?
Well, I would say to anybody, look at that footage, slow it down, and come to your own conclusions. But I very firmly believe that what you're seeing there is not consistent with the damage of a plane going into a building. But people have got to make their own minds up.
I'm sorry, I don't understand that. What do you mean? There was a plane or there was not a plane?
I would say to people, look at all the footage, from all the angles, and see how that plane goes into the building.
Every angle shows an aeroplane hitting the building.
It shows an aeroplane, it shows something melting into a building, not hitting a building. When a plane would hit a building like that, you would expect to see the wings start to fracture. You'd expect to see explosions when the engines, which are full of fuel, hit the building. You'd expect to see blowbacks of parts coming back off the thing. But when when you slow it down, you actually see a plane melt into the building, then you see the explosion once it's inside.
You'll be aware of the offence that some people will take.
Well, I'm not in the business of defending anybody. I'm trying to get the truth.
To the people who lost their lives.
No, I want justice for those people. Because if I'm right, and I believe I am, that the elements of the American government were responsible for this, then we have so far not had justice. And it's not just justice for those people who were killed on that day, it's also justice for the 650,000 people who were killed in Iraq as a result of that invasion predicated on 9/11, essentially. And the same with the innocent who died in Afghanistan. All of those people have suffered enormous injustice, and the best way to bring this bogus war on terror to an end is to expose 9/11 for the lie that it is.
Jonathan, we'll have to ramp our conversation here. We were going to spend a bit of time talking about the moon. We'll have to do that another time. Let me just check. Well, you guys believe we did go to the moon, right?
Yeah.
I know there's a conspiracy there about the flag.
No, don't get me wrong. I've no problems with the moon, no problems with...
no problems with going back.
I've got no problems with 9/11. I think it was probably... I think Princess Diana died because she didn't have a seatbelt on, I'm afraid.
Well, I think, and
I think the obvious answer to 9/11 is probably the correct one. Doesn't make the story any less interesting, but it's
Indeed. Well, at least we've had a chance to expose it. Thank you very much for being with us, David, and thank you, Jonathan, as well. Incidentally, we're going to be talking to NASA, a scientist involved with the NASA project, around about, half an hour's time from now, about that particular plot.
Thinking new perspectives with Credit Suisse, sponsors of the Financial Report.
376, they were very vulnerable. That 100 runs put the pressure back onto us. And it's the same thing with us. We want to try and bat to 8, and hopefully, we think Ashley can do a better job at that.
That's it for the time being. All the Champions League football for you in Sportsline at 10:30. We'll catch you then.
John, thank you very much indeed for that. Views absolutely split down the middle, as you might imagine, about David Shayler. I can't believe Sky News is giving airtime to the prat David Shayler. Shame on you, Sky. All these stupid conspiracy theories have been shown to be total rubbish. By contrast, George in London says the guy is so right. This is the best bit of footage you've ever shown on Sky. All evidence points to the use of thermite on 9/11. Well, we've broadcast the interview. You make your own mind up. This is Sky News, and on our website at sky.com/news, an extraordinary report from our man Stuart Ramsey in Afghanistan.
More on this story throughout the day for you. You can watch Sky News from 11 o'clock for a pre-budget report special.